All right, it is 10:02 a.m. Central Time, so we are ready to get started. First off, I would like to thank all of you for attending our Advancing Hospital Management and Clinical Research with Real-World Data webinar. Today, we're going to share a market update on a range of best practices we're observing from the application of our technology for hospital management decision-making with Joe Prosser from Carle Cancer Institute Leadership, and then we'll also share the clinical research opportunities available to hospitals and healthcare systems through real-world data with two of our very own Q-Centrix experts, Victor Wang and Amanda McKee. My name is Fantina Smith, and I am the Director of Customer Success, part of the Partner Experience team here at Q-Centrix, and I will be your host today. I'm going to quickly review a few housekeeping items before we begin. First and foremost, all participants have been muted to maintain the quality of today's discussion. If you have a question for today's presenters, please submit them to the Q&A button located in your participant controls at the bottom of the screen. If we do not get your question during the live webinar time, we will follow up with you via email afterwards. If you would like to refer back to this webinar or want to share our discussion with a colleague, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared via email within the next week. And finally, once our webinar concludes, a link to fill out a quick post-webinar survey will appear in your browser and in the chat box, and we would greatly appreciate your participation. And that is all on housekeeping. So without further ado, I'd like for our panelists to join me for some introductions. First, we have Joe Prosser, Director of the Carle Cancer Institute located in Normal, Illinois. Joe has been with Carle for 9 years in oncology services for 28 years and in leadership for the last 22 years. Joe also just recently graduated with a second master's degree in healthcare law. Congratulations and welcome, Joe. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Valentina. I appreciate it, and happy to be here and look forward to the conversation we're going to have here this morning.
Excellent, excellent. Next up, we have Victor Wang. Victor is our Senior Vice President of Real-World Data here at Q-Centrix and oversees our real-world data strategy, helping to align the data infrastructure and our capabilities to deliver high-quality research data sets for our partners. He comes to Q-Centrix with experience leading real-world data projects in both oncology and life sciences. He has partnered with top pharma companies to understand their data needs and to deliver high-value data sets while overseeing the data product management and delivery infrastructure. Victor has also helped to unlock the power of patient-generated data and a range of rare diseases for a number of life sciences companies. Welcome, Victor.
Hey, everyone. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for joining.
Great. And last, but certainly not least, we have Amanda McKee. Amanda has years of experience supporting large multi-hospital systems and has a broad understanding of pediatric cancer registries and the required research used to maintain the high-level acknowledgement of NCI designation. Joining Q-Centrix as part of the Champs Oncology acquisition, she is responsible for ensuring clients' needs are met relating to data timeliness and completion, program management, as well as onboarding new clients and overseeing the client implementation process. Welcome, Amanda.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you for joining our webinar today.
Well, it's a pleasure to have all of you to join me today. So now that we're all familiar with each other, let's dive into today's discussion. Victor, let's kick things off with a question for you. So as the country's leading clinical data management company, here at Q-Centrix, we are hearing a lot about real-world data. Victor, you recently joined Q-Centrix as our Senior Vice President of Real-World Data. Can you first set the stage for our audience members by explaining the connection between clinical data and real-world data? And then can you share a little bit about how it relates to hospitals and healthcare systems?
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining. So by background, I've worked in the commercial research sector for the last 10 years and have used a number of different types of data to help better understand the patient experience in cancer and other diseases. Eventually, all of these different types of data became referred to as real-world data. So it's a bit of a catch-all term, right, to reflect any and all data collected outside of a traditional prospective clinical trial. So RWD, real-world data, is really pretty broad. It can be EMR information, clinical data, registry data, like what Q-Centrix has historically been dealing with, billing information, patient-reported or patient-generated claims, social media, you name it. That said, at Q-Centrix and broadly, we believe that the center of this real-world data ecosystem really focuses on the clinical data. There's a lot of value in all of these different data types, but with clinical data, with EMR information, you can really understand the specific clinical phenotype and the journey of these patients through the healthcare system, directly from the place in which they're seeking care, typically their providers. So this type of clinical data we fully consider to be real world data, and predominantly we see it being used in two ways. Increasingly for clinical research, so leveraging the data that's collected out in the real world outside of a clinical trial to understand comparative effectiveness of different treatments, or to understand the unmet need in a specific patient population, and also used directly by hospitals to better understand the care that they're delivering to their community and to these patient populations, which we're really excited for Joe to expand on a bit today. So we've recently actually published a paper about the use of real-world data by hospitals within their clinical research programs, but broadly. So looking forward to diving into all of that today. Increasingly, I think with the last 2.5 years, the pandemic has really accelerated the demand and the focus on real-world data. Just because the need to sort of rapidly understand what's happening in a patient population in terms of, when you're unable to stand up a clinical trial or things are moving so quickly, to be able to gather this data to build a surveillance system is really, really valuable. So we're hearing a lot of great feedback from our hospital partners on their desire to start leveraging the data that they're interacting with and that they're generating at the hospital level more and more for different types of, whether it's research or just analysis of hospital operations.
Thank you, Victor, for providing us with that definition. It really sets the stage for today's discussion on how real-world data goes across the different areas of healthcare and how patient experience is really at the core of all of it. Now, Amanda, we've worked together for many years, and I've heard you describe your work as bridging bench to bedside. Can you elaborate on that and explain the role that registries play in generating real-world data, and why registry expertise is so crucial to proper data collection?
Yes, thank you, Valentina. So in my previous position, I was a research lab manager at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, specifically in radiation oncology. I was very fortunate enough to work on a project that actually went from the bench, our core research, to clinical trial. One of the things that we were looking at was exploring heat shock protein and its inability for the cancer DNA to repair itself when heat plus radiation was applied. We started a trial, we enrolled several patients, specifically for breast cancer, and we were undergoing this treatment mechanism. I was really fascinated at how that whole clinical trial enrollment process took place. Where did they get these patients from, and how did they bring those patients onto the study? Fast forward to my role here now at Q-Centrix as a senior manager in oncology cancer registry. And for me, there was just an instant connection of how we can leverage the 300+ data points that we collect on any given cancer patient in a very practical way. So hence the term, really bridging the gap between bench and bedside. And I think that it's really important to collect this data in the cancer registry in a very accurate, consistent, and concise manner for these very practical applications. And I know we're going to talk more about this later, so thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. And that's really the key. Accurately and thoroughly, that is the crest of data integrity. Thank you, Amanda. As Victor briefly mentioned in his first statement, real-world data can be used for a wide variety of initiatives, and today we'll be focusing on the use of real-world data in hospital management and clinical research. And we'll start with a few questions related to applying technology for hospital management decision-making, particularly at the Carle Cancer Institute. So Joe, we're seeing system mergers and hospital acquisitions across the board with many of our partners, Carle included. For others who may find themselves in a similar hospital merger or acquisition, what would be the most important information or data for them to review to help understand how their facility can fit into the bigger picture? In other words, what resources or departments do you find most helpful in obtaining data at Carle?
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. And I apologize, I'm having technical difficulties, so that's why unfortunately you're not able to see me. Hopefully you were able to see my picture in the introductions. So to Vantina's questions, we just recently went through, we were just actually acquired by Carle Foundation Hospital. Previously, we were a product of a joint venture between two local hospitals here in the Bloomington Normal Market. And so when we were going through that process, a lot of data was being asked of us here at the what was the Community Cancer Center, which is now the Carle Cancer Institute Normal. And some of that was actually our disease mix. We were looking at inpatient, outpatient data. They were asking for market share. We were looking at referral data from physicians, and even some of our quality and financial data as well. And so in some of the departments that were very useful with that, of course, was HIM, finance, even looking at our billing information from our billing departments as well. And so all this information was utilized actually and put together that assisted us with putting together a strategic plan for oncology services as when Carle came into this market. And so that data then has truly been managed over the last year and a half since the implementation of us being purchased by Carle. And it has been utilized to implement initiatives in regards to growth, in regards to program development and services here at the Carle Cancer Institute.
Thank you, Joe. And we're just happy to have you throughout this process of the merger and integration of your facilities. And it gave us really some insight into how important the data is and can be utilized. And Joe, you've mentioned to our team a number of times in the past that some of the key areas that you focus on when it comes to remaining competitive, despite being a smaller facility as part of the larger Carle system, are understanding leakage data, volumes of disease sites, and provider data. Many of our audience members today likely have similar interests related to real-world data and hospital management. Can you elaborate on how Carle uses real-world data for each of these topics?
Sure. So when we look at understanding leakage data, actually utilizing the Q-Centrix system has been very helpful with looking at developing a plan in regards to the leakage information that we have. And so how we've been able to elaborate on that is studying that information that we have received here from Q-Centrix, and then looking at developing a plan in regards to having some conversations with key stakeholders in regards to those physicians, those services here, and getting a better understanding of why patients are leaving the market. And so that's one area. The other thing too is when you look at the volume of disease sites is really, again, it's analyzing that information and understanding, going back to practice patterns, seeing where there are opportunities for growth in regards to certain disease sites, and also too looking at community data here. We've looked at, when we look at population data here in this market, looking at the number of cancer diagnoses, and that will help determine too areas of growth and opportunity as well.
Yeah, and Joe, I'm wondering if, for our audience here, if you have any more specific examples around, tactically, like what's a case study of, what data did you use and what type of change did that really enact for your specific hospital?
So one thing would be looking at breast cancers. We just recently brought in a breast surgeon here in the last couple of months. And so looking at that information, looking at the number of breast cancers we have here, what we've been seeing here at Carle, how many are being diagnosed in the community, looking at the number of screenings, that have been performed here in our community in our local hospital, and then developing an action plan around it. Where are those patients going? And providing an analysis of getting a better understanding of our breast cancer market here to develop an action plan around being able to capture those patients. And then also too, looking at an outside market here as well, or a neighboring hospital that actually is part of us, a sister hospital, and looking at opportunities for growth there. You know, when we look at trying to build a business and trying to capture more breast cancer diagnoses here in our region.
Got it. That makes sense. It's a really sort of impactful example of you know, how this data that's being collected can actually lead to decisions that, you know, kind of change the way that you're caring for the community by bringing in sort of specialized doctors for procedures.
Yeah, and I think too, it also adds, like you were just saying, Victor, when you're saying just looking at developing new programs, new services, where are there opportunities, and do we have the patients here that would be able to support that? And so a lot of that is going to come from the real world data that we obtain.
Well, this is absolutely fascinating. And, you know, overall, understanding patient trends and preferences and where they're coming in and going really helps us as a healthcare community determine how to provide better service delivery to our patients. Now, Joe, related to each of these topics, when you're having these very important discussions that impact the decisions Carle makes, what types of data points do you find most valuable during these discussions? Where do you start? And what are the specific things you look for? And where is the data coming from?
So I think where do I start is what's currently going on in our market. And I'm just going to focus here on breast cancer because I was just speaking about that, is what's currently going on here and get a current analysis. And then the data that I would go look at again would be those number of diagnoses here, the referrals, the referrals, where they're going, the referring physicians that we have, their numbers, the surgeons that we have here, and looking at all the information that they have in regards to the number of breast cancer patients that they're seeing. And then from there, we would be looking at trends over the last 3 to 5 years. And then what we would like to do is then review that information with key stakeholders, whether it's the medical director within the cancer program, administration, business development, even finance too, and looking at financials. And then coming up with an action plan around how we're going to be best to capture these patients so we can best serve them here in our community and make certain that you know, we're seeing as many patients as we can in regards to the information that we have. But really, it's just a matter of analyzing the information that we have, looking at trends, and then coming up with an action plan around that to implement.
Thank you, Joe. That's a great example of the cross-functional relationships that's necessary in the hospital setting in order to really set the stage for real-world data and to really leverage it. Now I'd like to transition and talk about how hospitals can leverage their clinical data for research purposes. Amanda, in your work, both here at Q-Centrix and previously with Washington University, you've seen firsthand how real-world data can be used to advance clinical research. Can you share a few of the opportunities you've seen both with our partners and in your previous work? And also, how can cancer registry data and I2O assist with identifying patient populations for clinical trial recruitment?
Yes, so I think one of the most common questions we receive from physicians and investigators is how many patients are in our system that fit XYZ criteria. And we're fortunate enough that they start with the cancer registry because that's what houses most of the oncology patients. And so we're able to utilize our software to help narrow down those patient populations to determine if they have enough to fulfill that requirement. This takes away a lot of the legwork for those doctors or investigators, and it allows us to streamline our efforts even before the study begins. So it helps in those really important decision-making processes before you start going down the path of an IRB approval. Now, we have a data analytics tool called Insight to Oncology, or commonly known as I2O. And this has some dashboards that we've created, and we've really built them out for like our top 4 sites. This would include breast, colon, lung, and prostate sites. And it has most of the data that we collect in the cancer registry, but it's available in a very de-identified way. So it gives that quick analysis for an investor to go in and, for instance, select if a patient is stage 2, ER, PR positive, and then they can select from there a whole series of other criteria. So they can really have that drill down effect. And that's what starts the prompting of, okay, I think we have what we need. Let's see if we can't make this happen. And so that is one of the ways that I think that the Cancer Registry can really partner and help to streamline some of these resources.
Thank you, Amanda. That's an excellent point about streamlining. As a clinical researcher myself, I've often found myself in situations trying to aggregate data, and it was always helpful to have an analytics tool available where I can see that information at the click of a button and to have all of data sources in one aggregated location. Now, my next question is for both Amanda and Joe around common challenges. Joe, can you share some of the common challenges hospitals face that can be alleviated with leveraging the data that's being captured on a day-to-day basis? And then Amanda, can you share some of the common challenges related to research initiatives?
I think some of the common challenges is just the integrity of the data that we have come into with some of those challenges, and so just making certain that it is accurate. So when we look at information that we do receive, that it is correct so that we can make sound decisions and moving forward with any types of initiatives or business development. So I think that's one area where we've seen some challenges here recently.
Thank you. That's great insight. And Amanda, research initiatives?
Yeah, I would say that, the pandemic hosted a whole slew of problems, right? And one of the issues were simply these clinical trials were put on pause or stopped altogether. I know that hospital resources were and continue to be stretched very thin. So there's always this struggle between utilizing those precious resources for direct patient care and then advancing our studies in medicine with clinical trial research. So I think that there is opportunities to leverage some of the data that's already being collected and maximize the efforts while providing resources for both.
Thank you, Amanda. And that's an excellent point about the pandemic. It really put us in a place in healthcare that we never thought we'd be in a position where there would be pause to clinical trials, and we had to get creative in the way that we were going to continue to provide care for patients. And so now this gives us a great example of how we can continue to use real-world data to help provide that care in what might be non-traditional ways that many of our partners have found themselves in. Now I'd like to give our audience members some tangible steps that they can take back with them related to real-world data projects. Victor and Amanda, can you share a bit more about some of the foundational steps to establish and execute a project involving real-world data? Amanda, how about we start with you?
Excellent. So as I alluded to previously, I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to identify your data source. Victor mentioned this at the beginning of our presentation today, that there's a whole multitude of data that's available. So really narrowing that down and deciding what is going to be your data source. Is that the EMR? Is it a data warehouse? Are you utilizing dedicated disease registries? Where are you going to start collecting this information? Once that happens, you have to ensure that you have accurate and complete data. And then you want to make sure that it's being collected in a timely manner, depending on the time constraints of your study. Identifying your patient population is hugely important, of course. And then really establishing the goals of your project. What are we looking to do here? What is the end goal? What are we wanting to accomplish? After that, it's really developing that solid execution and then moving forward with your IRB approval, getting your patient enrollment, and then starting to document all of the steps that you're taking along the way. And finally, last but not least, data analysis, conclusions, and then next steps. Is the project going to continue? Are we going to move towards publication? Are we doing presentations? Or what are we wanting to do with future partnerships? So those are sort of the step-by-step tacticals, but I know Victor's got some additional information to weigh in with.
Yeah, no, I think like those are all correct as it relates to the discrete steps. I think thematically, part of sort of driving a successful process is being really use case driven at the start. Defining the specific research questions or just questions in general that you might be trying to answer with the data can really help to inform the whole sort of chain of events. So what research questions do I need can help us understand what variables do we need from the data down to columns and rows in order to answer these questions. And then understanding which variables you need can really help to drive your understanding of what source data to use. Is it structured EMR? Do you sort of need a disease specific registry? Do you also need to pull in hospital billing information to address the questions that you're trying to answer, like Joe alluded to, right? Oftentimes sort of matching in patient financial information can be key to sort of understanding broader patterns. And so by understanding the questions, understanding the variables, and understanding the source, you can really help to establish a plan for the preparation of the data. Typically, when doing an analysis, the analysis is, like 15% of the work at the end, where the upfront work of getting buy-in, establishing the data sets, making sure that it has the right sort of fitness for the questions at hand, take up 85% of the true work effort there. And so just by being really clear on all of this, I think it allows you to systematically move through, understand, where you need to get buy-in, what you really need to do.
Thank you both. This is valuable insight for our audience. And to take this a step further, Victor, could you talk a little bit more about some of the essential components of an ideal real-world data model?
Yeah. So maybe going up a step above our last question, certainly focus on the data itself is really important. But what we've seen with a lot of our hospital partners is that it's key to establish a number of components even prior to diving into the data itself. Q-Centrix actually recently published a paper that highlights some of these items that we'll cover, but really it's 4 key points. One of the key things, and maybe this is a softer part of the process, is really establishing the stakeholders that you need internally, whether it's a hospital or any other type of organizations, to sort of make your project or your initiative successful. This could be researchers, it could be data scientists and analysts, it could be reviewers of the clinical content, it could be clinical staff themselves, it could be the IT team, the folks that'll have to help pull through the data from the various systems and silos in which that data resides. So defining who needs to weigh in at what points and who needs to do what is really key to success. Getting buy-in early so people understand and feel committed to sort of making a project successful is one of those really key points. Then I sort of touched on this earlier, but then establishing the data sources too. Is it EMR? Is it registry? Is it a mix? Is it billing information? So aligning these research questions to those variables, again, is super key. Another key thing to think through is the technology specifically. So, are you using RedCap? Are you using Excel? Is it a vendor tool? So where is this data going to be housed? Where is the data, the work, if there's any sort of manual abstraction or data management that needs to happen? Physically, where is this happening? Where are people working? Does everyone who needs to have access actually have access? And does the functionality of the tool match the specific needs? We see a lot of sort of sticking points in this type of thing, where data is being prepared all over, and then at the end of the day, you sort of have data that looks different in different systems. So being really clear on the technology at the start is key. And then, this is also sort of a fuzzier point, but just establishing the outcomes of what means success for a project. This is both the outcomes within the data. So, are we measuring progression-free survival? Are we measuring disease-free living time? Those outcomes, just being really clear on that, can help to kind of inform both the stakeholders you need as well as what you need from the data. But then, outcome more broadly. What does a successful project look like overall? Are we trying to publish? Is this for a manuscript? Is this by a specific deadline for a conference? Is this to inform an internal quality metrics or even a regulatory submission? Being really clear on all of that, I think, will have people rowing in the same direction, both internally and then with any other vendors or folks that you're involving.
Thank you, Victor. And it's really all about positioning, setting up the right stakeholders, having the right data sources, the right technology will give you the right outcomes that you're looking for. So thank you for that. Now we're coming towards the end of the questions that I have prepared for today. So I'd like to pose a question to all of the panelists. What could the future of real-world data usage look like for our hospitals?
I'll chime in first. I think, increasingly as real-world data becomes sort of very attractive as a source for all types of research stakeholders, whether it's life sciences, hospitals, payers, other research and regulatory bodies, more attention is going to be drawn on how this data is produced and where it's coming from. So figuring out that entire audit trail end to end, what at each of these variables, what does it mean? How was it produced? Can we sort of trace it back to the specific system that it all came from? So focusing on these data provenance and really that end-to-end production of data is going to be increasingly key. And so this is where Q-Centrix really sees a lot of room to grow for our hospital partners. Hospitals are really going to be at the center of the dialogue as it relates to real world data, and particularly the clinical data piece of real world data as a discussion point. So investing now will, I think, really prepare a lot of our partner organizations to be ready to leverage their data for new and important research needs.
This is Joe. Just have a quick comment. I think when you look at real world data usage for the hospitals, I think it has great potential to reveal the whole person's journey, as it can revolutionize what healthcare and clinical research can achieve. I think also this data could be utilized to help with improving patient outcomes.
And of course, my leverage is really with the registries, right? And so if you're an accredited facility, we are always being asked by our governing bodies to collect more data, collect that faster data. And so as more of this real world data comes about and it's being analyzed at a national level, we're starting to see trends, and then that trickles down to the registries. And so we're starting to collect more data in specific areas. For example, genetics has become a real hot topic. And I know that we're a little bit behind the game, but we can tie certain oncology cancers to specific biomarkers. And so those are the things that we're starting to collect a little bit more and more, and that's expanding your data set. So, and that's all based on real world data that's been provided to, our standard setters on an annual basis. So I think that it's going to become increasingly more so where we're going to expand our data set more and more.
Thank you all for sharing your insights on usages for real-world data in a hospital setting. Those are all the questions that I have, leaving us with about 15 minutes for audience Q&A. I see a few questions have come in, so if you have something on your mind that you'd like to ask today's panelists, please submit your question in the Q&A button located in your participant controls. So let's start with this question. How can hospitals use the data they already have to inform decisions around planning prospective clinical trials? Amanda.
Yeah, so again, my stake in the game is really with the disease registries, and I think that is a great place to start. I can't say enough about these individuals that are very highly skilled to collect this data in a very consistent manner. The data is typically scrutinized by a series of quality checks, and that ensures your data integrity and provides confidence by the end users. In oncology, I know we collect, like I said, over 300 different data points on any given patient. And we also follow them through the span of their lifetime. So we collect information relating to any disease recurrences or even additional cancers that the patient might develop. So I think really partnering with your registry provides not only context to the data that you're capturing, but it will provide a more meaningful, it will make it more meaningful and help you to ensure that the data that you're getting is correct and accurate and really meets your needs.
Thank you, Amanda. One more question. I'm going to toss this one to Victor. When using clinical EMR data, how usable is the structured EMR data directly for research purposes versus the need for customized clinical data enrichment workflows?
Yeah, the short answer is that it depends. Typically, we've found that in probably 90% of our research projects or data questions overall, there is some need to go into the unstructured information, the physician notes, the progress reports, potentially different lab systems to sort of answer that specific question. But there are times in which the depth of the data doesn't need to go that specific into a patient's record. And in those instances, pulling the data directly from the EMR in structured form can be enough. I think it really goes back to establishing the use case and understanding the variables. If you have key stratifying variables or outcome variables that we know won't be available in the EMR, whatever EMR that might be, then typically I think this is where Q-Centrix oftentimes is leaned on to be a partner to go into these records and sort of pull things out in that consistent way. And I was struggling to get off mute for a second on Amanda's question there. But as it relates to prospective clinical trials, this is an area where increasingly a lot of our hospital partners are coming to us for, as there's more and more pressure to enroll patients into clinical trials, and as the clinical trials themselves increasingly are more complex as it relates to finding and screening in these patients, a lot of hospitals are wondering, how can we do this more efficiently? I think an easier area to get started is hospitals already have so much data. Right? Whether it's the registry or the EMR, some of this is just down to, are the right folks connecting with each other? Are tools being deployed onto the data sets that already exist to help folks identify those patients or to help them select better clinical trials for their particular hospital? So an easy example of this is, if you already are collecting a bunch of information from your cath lab or you're a part of a stroke registry, and a CRO is calling your hospital around joining a specific sort of high-risk heart disease trial. You can leverage that data pretty easily because it's already clinically deep, it's already pre-cleaned and manually reviewed to really understand, all right, historically as a hospital, how frequently are we seeing these patients with a specific risk score? You can look back 2 years or 5 years and be able to have a pretty good sense of your specific population and how likely it is to be successful in enrolling for a specific clinical trial. And that's great outcomes for everyone, right? It's better for patients that are able to join and receive access to novel therapeutics, but it's also helpful for the hospital to not waste time and resources standing up clinical trials that they may not be able to enroll patients for.
Absolutely. And Victor, we have another question for you. Other types of businesses have access to troves of clinical data and have the same challenges as hospitals do. How does the process differ from hospitals for other types of businesses?
Yeah. So increasingly over the last 2 years or so, we've had a lot of interest from non-hospital parties who have the same clinical data management needs as hospitals. So effectively, there are not huge differences between how a hospital operates and how a non-hospital entity with access to clinical data might behave. Typically, they have similar challenges with the data, right? There's a lot of information locked away and unstructured information, or the data itself is just very, very sort of not clean because it's coming from so many different places. And so they need help in terms of structuring it and preparing that data set for research. So for the most part, the profiles are pretty similar. We do understand that a lot of companies that are they have access to clinical data, maybe they're a real world data company themselves, they may not have the same provenance access in terms of the source system or being able to go back into the EMR or being able to go to a specific doctor or nurse to understand what was happening with the case. So they don't have that same level of access that a hospital does. But as it relates to the data itself, it's really the same challenges. And I think the framework that we use in thinking about how to help our hospitals can be really useful in helping these businesses as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Victor. Joe, this next question is for you. When should you bring in a third-party vendor? How can they help in structuring data?
So from our experience here, when we brought in a third-party vendor actually was Q-Centrix, was basically, it came down to the capacity of individuals that I had here on staff. And so we were running into some challenges with keeping staff here for our tumor registry. And so we basically made a decision to outsource that at that time due to the challenges we were having here. Actually, before we were at Carle Cancer Institute here in Normal. I might lean on Amanda here as far as how can they help us structure that data, because having them come in and help with getting that all organized. I'll kind of lean on Amanda for that piece, if that's okay.
No problem, Joe. So I think when the cancer registry first comes in, we start to partner with you and we do a full assessment of your program, wanting to understand the goals and the needs of your program. We also look at where you are with your abstracting and your case finding, and then we start to build some workflow around that. We start to get the proper resources in place, and then we also start to collect that data in an efficient manner to help you meet your deadlines and your goals. And then going beyond just what's required of the cancer registry as far as, your COC accreditation or what might be required for your NAPBC accreditation, the system or program itself might have specific goals. And Joe kind of alluded to this at the beginning, where he's starting to look at a variety of financial data as well as specific disease data relating to breast cancer cases. And so if you have a physician who's looking at something very specifically for breast cancer and they want to do more advanced studies on that, the cancer registrars are already working in your EMR. And I think that that's an opportunity for future partnerships where we can look at that information, determine if it's easily collectible for us, and then determine how we want to collect that. And it's just another way that the cancer registry can further extend our services and really help partner to meet your internal goals and objectives as well, relating to clinical trials or other advanced research that might be happening as well.
Thank you, Amanda. Our next question is also related to the Cancer Tumor Registry. And Victor, I'm going to bounce this one to you. What type of products and what's the Q-Centrix approach to providing abstraction services to the Cancer Tumor Registry?
Yeah, this is a challenging question. I think it's an area where technology is advancing quickly as it relates to our ability to sort of understand what's happening within free text information. So Q-Centrix is certainly investing a lot in terms of understanding these new technologies and how they can change the game for building out these cancer tumor registries. Overall, what we've found is that there are a number of challenging areas as it relates to trying to deploy these new technologies, both because some of the concepts for cancer registries are just super challenging as it relates to pulling out information like disease progression, having access to or understanding sort of the details of imaging reports, to pull things like histology or stage or TNM staging, these types of variables that exist in these tumor registries. And the other big challenge really is, directly in the EMR, oftentimes the correct attributions aren't necessarily made. So a lot of patients out in the real world, which is not true of the clinical trial population, these are patients that have really complex disease journeys, right? They might be getting treated for 2 types of cancer or 3 types of cancer simultaneously. And within a tool like an Epic or other EMRs, it's not necessarily clear that you can sort of make these correct attributions of, well, what stage is being referred to for this tumor versus that other tumor. So long way of saying there are a lot of challenges to sort of these auto population techniques. At the same time, we're investing really heavily, and because we believe that there are ways to sort of make things faster. We don't necessarily ever see the human side of cancer tumor registries going away, simply because the field itself is too challenging. Having a certified tumor registrar and having the folks with clinical expertise reviewing these challenging cases to make sure that the data is of the highest quality, I think is sort of paramount and isn't really going away. But for whoever asked the question, happy to dive into this further too. We're actually piloting a number of different approaches and would be happy to sort of look for early adopters to work with us on this.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too, Victor. I completely agree with everything that you're saying. There is room here for automation in the cancer registry. And I know that that statement might sound a little bit scary to my fellow registrars, but that is the reality in which we live in. As I mentioned earlier, we're being asked to collect more and more data. Everyone is hungry for this data set. And how can we accomplish that? We're going to have to lean on automation. So it's, you know, to Victor's point, you got to have the right people in place that can determine what of those elements can easily be automated versus which of those elements really need to have some type of review by an expert to make sure that the data that we're collecting really is consistent and accurate. You know, not every disease site is very clean cut and easily managed. Sometimes it's difficult for physicians to determine how far the disease has extended and really where what is the best treatment. And so some of those grayer areas will still need to be reviewed by some sort of expert within the field. So I just wanted to add on to that. Thank you.
Thank you both, Amanda and Victor, for tackling that question and sharing a little bit more insight into the Q-Centrix approach. Those are all the questions in our Q&A segment. And this has been a fascinating discussion today on real-world data and how it can be used in hospital management and clinical research. So this concludes our webinar today for Advancing Hospital Management and Clinical Research and Real-World Data webinar. Thank you, Joe, for joining us and for sharing your insights on real-world data in the hospital setting. And thank you to our Q-Centrix experts, Victor and Amanda, for joining us as well. And to our audience, if you have any more questions, feel free to send them to qcevents@qcentrix.com, and we'll be sure to respond as soon as possible. As you exit this webinar, you should see a link to the survey pop up in your browser, or you can just click on the link that is now available in the chat. Either way works, but we encourage you to complete this to let us know if you found this discussion of value and to let us know if you'd like to receive more information about clinical data management for research. And finally, as I mentioned before, we'll be sending an email with a recording along with a copy of our recent position paper, Real-World Data Best Practices for Clinical Applications and Evidence Generation, to all registrants within the next week. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.